See, I
Yeah,
tend to
I
have
mean,
immodest lunches. They're grossly immodest. And
which make it very difficult to have a fare afterwards. You're
yeah, well,
just
this
so
is it.
full.
Mid burp, it's hard to put on those flirty sentences. So yeah, yeah.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Pleasure of the Text podcast. We are your hosts, Gareth and Shannon, and today we are engaging with our creative writing segment. And what are we discussing today, Gareth?
Today we're discussing writer's block. Does it exist? If so, or if not, how do you overcome it? So yeah, I guess we'll start by asking you the question, Shannon. What is writer's block to you?
So writer's block to me is when I can't write. It's very frustrating. But it's not even that I don't have an idea. It's that probably I'm now lacking the discipline to sit down and write something. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I don't think I've ever really had writer's block. I think I've had full-time job, and people calling me when I'm sitting trying to write and things like that. And I think you do need to warm up. So every time you get distracted, it's another sort of block of unproductive time. And that for me is what writer's block has been, insofar as I think I've ever had it. Do you have any techniques currently for dealing with writer's block when you have it?
It's a good question. So I suppose, people listening who have experienced writer's block, if they believe it to be so, must be very envious of us. I had it quite recently when I visited you and went on a holiday for 3 weeks. And then I came back and tried to do some writing and I just couldn't get back into it. So
Okay.
the technique then was I read a lot. I probably read about 5 books in under 2 weeks, and then I was ready.
Okay, so basically, our listeners should get from this that visiting me, being around me at all, can potentially cause massive writer's block. So we should put a warning on these podcasts. Just the sound of my voice is sort of destroying your creativity as I speak. But you can read your way out of it. I think that's really sensible.
You're giving yourself a bad name there, Gareth. I think it was less you as opposed to more me. So on my holiday, it was a constant go, 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 catching up with people, dopamine hits all the time, going out for walks. To do writing, I suppose, unless you're recording your voice, you have to sit still in a space for a particular amount of time to produce anything. And I just wasn't in that habit after that period.
Okay. Yeah. So it comes back to what we were talking about last week, that you've got to kind of be at it every day. And what is it, Graham? We were talking about Graham Greene. He was saying that, even if he was in the midst of a torrid love affair, that would have to be after lunch, and presumably you wouldn't have garlic for lunch, but he'd write in the morning and then have a modest lunch and then engage in his torrid love affair.
I'm interested in both the torrid love affair and what a modest lunch is.
Oh, I'm sure the two are connected. Yeah, they'd have to be, wouldn't they? See, I tend to have immodest lunches. They're grossly immodest. And
which make it very difficult to have a fare afterwards.
Yeah, well, this is it. Mid burp, it's hard to put on those flirty sentences. So, yeah.
Hey there, girl.
Exactly. So because I don't really think writer's block is a thing, I thought, well, how are we going to define it? And so I thought I better get into some deep research. So I went to Wikipedia. Yeah, I
actually donated $10 to them 2 days ago.
Did you?
Yeah, because I was doing research for our show notes and I kept going to Wikipedia because it was just one of the best resources and it was all there. And I was just like, you know what? I'm going to donate.
That's a really good thing to do. And people sort of diss Wikipedia disrespect to the max, but in actual fact, there was a study done, and it was found to be as accurate as, for example, the Encyclopedia Britannica, and several other noted encyclopedias. So it does have its mistakes, but no more than any other encyclopedia. So I guess we should say donate to Wikipedia. It's a great resource.
Yeah.
And hopefully this will in some way benefit us by endorsing Wikipedia. Wikipedia fans, listen and subscribe. But I went to Wikipedia, and I found an interesting quote which I'd like to share. This is a direct quote from the webpage. In her 2004 book, The Midnight Disease, The Drive to Write, Writer's Block, and the Creative Brain, the writer and neurologist Alice W. Oh my God, Flaherty? I should have practiced this. Alice W. Flaherty. Maybe it's Flatty. No, anyway.
I would say Flaherty.
Flaherty. Oh my God. You see, I can't do flirty sentences. So I had an immodest breakfast. Alice W. Flaherty has argued that literary creativity is a function of specific areas of the brain, and that block may be the result of brain activity being disrupted in those areas. Dr. Flaherty suggested in her writing that there are many diseases that may impact one's ability to write, one of which she refers to as hypergraphia, or the intensive desire to write. So, you don't want to write too much. And actually Thomas Mann, I'm going to distract myself. Thomas Mann famously said, a writer is someone for whom writing is more difficult than it is for other people. So she could have something there. I think he'd agree. And she points out that the condition of hypergraphia basically affects the patient's temporal lobe, usually by damage. So like when you're banging your head on your desk because you can't write, that's not a good idea. And it may be the same changes in this area of the brain that can contribute to writers' blocking behaviors. So now, again, this is just Wikipedia, and I haven't looked into what the writer's blocking behaviors may be, but I assume that the implication here is that there is a sort of a series of behavioral processes by which we block ourselves. This and brain damage.
So, yeah. When she uses the word disease, is she being literal in the word that there's diseases stopping people from writing, or she's just being very expressive in her terminology here?
No, my impression is she's speaking very deliberately. So again, beware of Typhoid Gareth, because he's got the disease and he'll give it to you. So just keep that in mind. It may be transmitted through radio waves. I really don't know, but like and subscribe. So anyway, that's that was
a great way.
Yes. So that's one theory.
My problem with this is, people love having their excuses and leaning on their excuses. How easy would it be to say, I have hypergraphia. There's such an intense desire for me to write that I've just blocked myself. No.
My goodness. I think during one of those lunches, if you said that, it would seem quite tragic and poetic, wouldn't it? And that might be a way of beginning a torrid love affair. Don't you think?
Sympathy sex?
Yeah, sympathy sex. Isn't that what we all go for? No, wait. Oh, that could just be me. Oh, no.
Oh, dear, Gareth.
Oh, no. Well, this one's gone off the rails. But I'm going to propose that writer's block occurs for two reasons. The first reason, and we talked about this last week, is that the writer is waiting for uninvited inspiration, which will likely never come to them. And the second reason is I think a writer can be too close or too far away from their writing. And I think in that case, you need to place a framed focalizing technique between yourself and the page. A bit like a pair of glasses. And this whole theory came to me in my 40s when I started needing glasses. And when you sit in front of your writing without glasses, you can't see what's happening. You really can't see your writing. And I think it's actually not that different to having a kind of a brain block. I think it's a similar sort of thing. So I think you need a sort of a mental pair of glasses, and they might be for short-sightedness or long-sightedness. And I think there are two kinds of lack of focus in writing. And we can place these on ourselves to be able to better see our writing. And so that's what we're going to look at today, putting on some glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any glasses?
No.
No?
And it's a point of tension between Luke and I. Luke's my partner, everyone. So he is saying that I will have to have glasses by the time I'm 40. And that's just, clinically proven that everyone has to have glasses by their 40. And I am determined to have 20/20 vision by the time I'm 50, just to make a point. I do not have glasses, so I'm not going to be able to put any on. And I was just thinking, so the person who has hypergraphia, in Flaherty's point, intensive desire to write, I would liken that to someone who has, in your reference, too far away from their writing. They have this really great idea. They're too far away. The point it's too meta, really, to then actually dive in and just produce a piece of work, word by word.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. When you're writing well, or when you're reading well, you feel absolutely in alignment with what's happening. Like when you're reading well, there doesn't feel like there's any space between you and the page. It's like you're inside the book.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's a focusing issue, personally. But we're going to approach it as a focusing issue, and we'll see what we get out of that. And hopefully it's going to go well. I'm just going to drop my page on the floor. Page 2 of the notes. So we're going to talk about free writing. Shannon, have you ever done any free writing?
Yes, I've done it once, and that was when I first joined your creative writing segment, and you made us sit down for a certain period of time and just write.
Yep.
But I would love your definition.
No, that's excellent. That's exactly what happened. I force people into doing this, and they usually find they were quite glad they did. It is like doing warm-ups. It's like being a singer and warming up your voice, or, a dancer and warming up your legs, or whatever dancers use. And as a general rule, I think writers are a bit like singers and dancers in that if we don't have someone push us to warm up, we're inclined not to want to do it. And so one of the goals here, I hope, is to encourage people to warm up. And there are various ways to warm up. And even spending 5 to 10 minutes before you start writing the stuff you really care about, you'll find this just kind of trains your brain. It sharpens and focuses everything. And it really depends on what kind of writer you are as to what technique's going to work better for you. But looking at free writing, the version of free writing to which I subscribe is very much in the line of Virginia Woolf's writing. She published a collection of short stories in 1921. It was the only collection that was published in her lifetime of stories, called Monday or Tuesday. And the collection included 8 short stories that were all experimental in nature. And if you look at her work before Monday or Tuesday and her work after Monday or Tuesday, the title, not the days, you'll notice that it had a fairly profound effect on her writing. And you can see the seeds of her later works, like Mrs. Dalloway and so forth. The titular story, Monday or Tuesday, is a phrase that crops up earlier in an essay she wrote in 1919 called Modern Fiction. And I'm just going to read this to you because I think it's interesting. So this is her idea of a new form of writing. Quote, examine for a moment an ordinary mind on an ordinary day. The mind receives a myriad impressions, trivial, fantastic, evanescent, or engraved with the sharpness of steel. From all sides they come, an incessant shower of innumerable atoms, and as they fall, as they shape themselves into the life of Monday or Tuesday, the accent falls differently from of old. The moment of importance came not here but there, so that if a writer were a free man and not a slave, if he could write what he chose, not what he must, if he could base his work upon his own feeling and not upon convention, there would be no plot, no comedy, no tragedy, no love interest or catastrophe in the accepted style, and perhaps not a single button sewn on as the Bond Street tailors would have it. So I think that's a wonderful quote. And it's actually something in a letter she wrote to Miss Ethel Smith. And basically, you know, we'll probably talk about different conventions of writing as the podcast goes on. And, you know, I think we're both fans of Asian writing.
Yes.
Yeah. And it doesn't follow
also,
these conventions.
Yeah, Latin American writing. So
Absolutely.
Argentinian.
Yeah.
Oh, it's great.
It's wonderful. Yeah. But Woolf comes from, you know, a British tradition. And there are some really established conventions that she was dealing with when she was writing. And those conventions are still actually quite established now. This particular book, I think, was self-published, folks. So there's no shame in that. And I believe, I think it was her sister who did the cover art and the other etchings for text block sort of stuff. And they did like 100 copies, I think, or it might have been 1,000, but it was a short run. But yeah, she wrote these experimental stories, and one of which was called The Mark on the Wall. And when I've done writing classes in the past, I've always used The Mark on the Wall as an example of free writing. I don't know 100% that it's a first draft. I think it reads like a first draft, like a fantastic and fascinating and scattered first draft. And in The Mark on the Wall, Woolf is very much enacting what she's describing in that quote I read. She's just letting her mind go where it may. And so I thought, because people are probably sick of my voice and it could be creating writer's block as we speak, I thought, Shannon, perhaps you would be willing to read. We have an extract. It's quite cut down from The Mark on the Wall. Would you be happy to read that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll just bring it up now. The Mark on the Wall. Perhaps it was the middle of January in the present that I first looked up and saw the mark on the wall. In order to fix a date, it is necessary to remember what one saw. So now I think of the fire, the steady film of yellow light upon the page of my book, the 3 chrysanthemums in the round glass bowl on the mantelpiece. Yes, it must have been in the winter time, and we had just finished our tea, for I remember that I was smoking a cigarette when I looked up and I saw the mark on the wall for the first time. The mark was a small round mark, black upon the white wall, about 6 or 7 inches above the mantelpiece. And yet that mark on the wall is not a hole at all. I cannot be sure, but it seems to cast a perceptible shadow, suggesting that if I ran my finger down that strip of the wall, it would at a certain point mount and descend a smooth tumulus like these barrows on the South Downs, which are, they say, either tombs or camps. Of the two I should prefer them to be tombs, desiring melancholy like most English people, and finding it natural at the end of a walk to think of the bones stretched beneath the turf. There must be some book about it. Some antiquary must have dug up those bones and given them a name. What sort of a man is an antiquary, I wonder? Retired colonels, for the most part, I dare say, leading parties of aged labourers to the top here, examining clods of earth and stone. when a stroke lays him low and his last conscious thoughts are not of wife or child, but of the camp and that arrowhead there, which is now in the case at the local museum, together with the foot of a Chinese murderess, a handful of Elizabethan nails, a great many Tudor clay pipes, a piece of Roman pottery, and the wine-glass that Nelson drank out of, proving I really don't know what.
Wonderful. The foot of a Chinese murderess. Where did that come from, I wonder?
Well, that's free writing, isn't it? Where does it come from?
Free writing. So we could imagine Wolf sitting down and just writing that straight out, not thinking it through. It just happened. Was there anything else about the piece that jumped out at you?
It flows like how you would think and you would speak. It's not, I definitely noticed that it's not structured in any way.
Yeah, it isn't. Well, actually, no, that's not 100% true. It does have a very small structural conceit, which is the mark on the wall. So the idea, the phrase, the image, and the repetition of the mark on the wall is a small structural conceit. So you can imagine it's a bit like you've driven a nail into your desk and you're working your way out from it on a rubber band. And when you get too far away from it, you can bounce back to that point, that mark on the wall, and start again in another direction. I guess you would call that a sort of a textual touchstone. So in free writing, you can use one of those touchstones if you wish to make it slightly less free. And it could be anything. It could be a sound, a smell, a memory, anything at all, really, a color. Whatever jumps into your head in the moment, it's good to mix and match and try different things. I remember once when I was doing some free writing for a class, there was a dog barking. And every time it barked, I went back in my free writing to the bark. So I would try and get a little ways away from it, and then the bloody dog would bark again, and I'd have to go back to the bark and move out from there again. And it's a really interesting process. So that's what we're going to do in this, when we do the creative writing podcasts, we're going to do exercises. And so what we're normally going to do, I suppose, if you want to join along, listener, is I'll set out what we're going to do, and then you can hit pause and come back when you're done. But in this particular instance, we're actually going to have some background noise for the two exercises we do today. They're both going to be 5 minutes long. So if you don't want to listen to them, I imagine the best thing to do would be to jump 5 minutes ahead in the podcast. But we're about to do that now, I think. But yeah. The sound that we're going to use for this writing exercise, if you listen to last week's podcast, we spoke a little bit about cafe writing and decibels, and I found the actual source for that information. It is a academic article, "Is Noise Always Bad?" Exploring the effects of ambient noise on creative cognition. Riveting read. I highly recommend it. And what they found is that during a series of experiments, a range of decibels, around 70 decibels, is about ideal.
Okay, so it's 70.
Between 50 and 70. 50 is really pushing it down. Over 70 is pushing it too far up. And that was very much a cafe. It tends to be in that range. Also, if you're at home and, you're trying to write and your significant other is listening to TV, instead of shouting at them to turn it down, use it. Use it in your writing. It'll help. So anyway, we're going to do our exercise now, and then we'll come back at the end of the 5 minutes. We're going to write for 5 minutes. We're going to free write. And so, okay, what that means is that you don't think about what to write. You write about what you're thinking, and you allow the play of associations to work its way across the page. You don't have to rush. I'm quite certain Shannon's going to have a lot more to read than I will. But it's really important to keep your hand moving at all times, or if you're typing, your hands. And if you find it a boring or annoying thing to have to be doing, write about that. So basically, yeah, 5 minutes. And we'll get cracking, will we, Shannon? And we'll see
Yep,
everyone.
I'm excited.
We'll put on some cafe noise to keep people entertained for 5 minutes.
Yep, and I will start the timer. And if you're driving, and obviously don't pull over and stop in the middle of the road, but go home and definitely do this because it will definitely be worth it. So I'm just going to stick the timer on now, and happy riding, everyone. And we're done.
How was that for you, Shannon?
Very therapeutic. It was great.
It's good, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah.
Did you want to read yours out first?
Oh, I can. Yeah, absolutely. Isn't it a bit like, it's a bit like you're walking on hot concrete and you're like, this is rubbish. And then you hit the cool grass of inspiration, and things start happening.
Yeah.
I should have written about that. All right. Well, I'm going to read mine out now. Okay. So here we go. Sharing my free writing on a podcast. What was I thinking? It's bound to be self-conscious, awkward, self-contradictory, self-aware. What was it Camus said? You're always partly to blame. I'm wholly to blame for this, of course, but let's not labor the point. Let's try for some reasonable excuse instead. My cat ate my free writing. Maybe I could pull a muscle. Claim hypergraphia. No. Pull a muscle. In my finger, I guess. Writer's finger. That might work. Like the draftees who'd cut off their trigger fingers to avoid combat. Imagine being that person. I can imagine that. Locked in a hospital ward with others more valiant, the casualties of war, all of them sharing their war wound stories. What lies would I need to contrive to survive in such a place? That's where I got to.
Well, you did start the segment saying that I would produce far more than you, and I'm finding that debatable right now. That was quite a bit, and it was fantastic.
Well, thank you. You could see I was all very rambly and self-conscious, and because as soon as we started, I thought, oh my God, we're on a podcast. What was I thinking? And that was literally what I was thinking, and regretting terribly ever suggesting we do this. But yeah, you can see that there's the potential beginnings of a story of someone being in a hospital with a missing trigger finger, trying to claim to the others there who've been, valiantly injured in combat that their trigger finger got shot off or something like that happened. And I think that would be a really awkward comedy, which I would love to read. So maybe I'll write it. Yeah, you never know. What about you?
So you just came up with that on the spot?
Oh, yeah, on the spot. It was just where my mind went. I was thinking about pulling a finger muscle, and I was, thinking about my finger and thought, well, I could cut it off. Which, they say that people would rather be in the casket at a funeral than the one delivering the eulogy. So yeah, I think we have those kinds of thoughts. You don't want to go to work in the morning. Maybe I can be hit by a bus.
I used to have those thoughts all the time. And that's when I knew that I would have to quit very shortly.
Right? So what about yours? Let's hear yours.
Well, I just wanted to stress that because last week we said, waiting for inspiration is the mugs game. And you've already produced like this amazing piece of work in 5 minutes, which would definitely lead somewhere, like you said, a comedy. So yeah, don't wait around for inspiration, everyone, and just do this instead. So mine, it was very much, it's kind of similar to the mark on the wall where you were talking about decibels and shouting at someone to turn her TV off, and that's where my inspiration came from.
Great.
So, and I'll start. People call it white noise. I don't think it as such. It's just noise. Incessant, mindless. It has never distracted me as it does others. I could never imagine falling asleep to its jagged volumes, ads one moment, dull talk shows the next. I look over my shoulder at my husband, sitting in his second-hand lazy boy recliner, beer nestled between the girth of his extended belly and sizable cleavage, far larger than my own. His singlet has escaped the elastic of his holey boxers, ridden up his stomach to expose black curly hairs. I know if I come closer, I would see lint caught within the hair's wiry embrace. Why can't he just turn that bloody box down, put the beer aside, eyes attentive, and listen to me rather than the strangers over there?
Wonderful. What an image. Yeah. It's very pungent, isn't it?
Yeah.
My goodness. I couldn't work out if it was like a repulsive or an almost erotic image. It was kind of interesting, you know?
Yeah.
Had a real
Well,
Song of Solomon vibe.
Oh,
Do you know the Song of
who's
Solomon?
that?
It's from the
No.
Bible. It's
Oh, okay, that's why I don't know.
it's talking about God's love in terms of a sort of more sexualized kind of love, and it has all sorts of stuff about goat's hair and things like that. Which and it kind of reminded me of that. It had that sort of sensual sort of quality, but in a way, it was sort of quite gross as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, who knows? If it had progressed longer and we had another 5 minutes, it might be a sympathy sex situation happening. Who knows?
It might be. I guess that's what we hope for that character. And I suppose we
Yeah.
should whack the disclaimer on it that it's not based on Luke,
Oh, yeah.
who was introduced earlier in the podcast, and
Yeah.
is a slim and magnificent specimen. So
We might be able to catch him in his natural element passing by.
yeah, right. So what do you think you would do with that piece? It's a wonderful description of a character.
I don't know. I kind of had this image where she would get up into the kitchen, start preparing dinner, and then while he goes off to have a shower, her getting the, you know how you get those meat scissors and you cut the chicken up, going behind the TV and just cutting the cord.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh my! That's sort of umbilical though, isn't it? As well. Yeah, maybe you could bring in a baby theme. You know that they never had a child, but yeah, and it could build into this whole thing, or perhaps even.
And she could be jealous of his belly because she wanted the extended belly from.
Yeah, and you know he's got the cleavage, and there's almost a kind of, babies are kind of squishy and flabby and wonderful, but squishy and flabby. And so he could be a mixture of her and the baby and all kinds of things like that. And the box TV could be like the crib in which all his paternal attention is directed.
Yeah. Gosh, writing is great.
Writing's great fun, and it's really good to do it with other people. It's good to bounce ideas. I think people are way too worried about having a sort of an isolated original thought, that cliche of creative inspiration, which I don't think is a real thing at all.
That's definitely something we should talk about on another podcast, I would say.
I see what you're saying.
Episode.
Absolutely. We'll put that on the list to talk about. So that's free writing. And from that, you can build things. And sometimes, particularly in your piece, Shannon, there were strings of words that were really striking. And sometimes it could just be strings of words that you pull out of your free writing that you might, note down for a future story. But once you've done that process, you're kind of limbered up, And then you're
do you
ready.
use free writing before you start your writing in the morning?
No, because that's not my problem. I think free writing works really well if you need ideas.
Yeah.
And my problem is more that I have too many ideas and can't slow myself down enough to pick one and move forward. So the way I stretch myself, and I do it as part of my writing process, so I don't separate the two out. I do not so free writing, which we'll talk about in a minute. I think people are either one or the other usually.
Yeah.
But I enjoy doing free writing, and certainly you come up with ideas that you wouldn't necessarily come up with in any other way. So that's quite a powerful thing. But yeah, I'm a not so free writer. What would you say you are? Do you think you like constraints, or do you like the freedom of the blank page?
I think I like the freedom of the blank page. I mean, it's either or. Sometimes I have an idea, and then, the blank page is an invitation for me to express that idea. Whereas other times when I'm struggling to produce or finish something, it's good to place a constraint on myself.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's possibly true that I'm probably a very singular sort of person, so I tend to always need not so free writing rather than free writing. But it's possibly true that it can be one or the other, depending on your mood and where you are in your life and various other things.
Mm.
So let's talk about not so free writing. This is the one I use all the time. I'll
Okay.
explain that a bit more down the track. But we have another wonderful quote. This one, I'm not going to actually say who it's by right now. But if you could once again read this difficult extract out, Shannon, that would be much appreciated.
No worries. Noon rings out, a wasp, making an ominous sound, a sound akin to a klaxon or a tocsin, flits about. Augustus, who has had a bad night, sits up, blinking and purblind. How was it? Augustus now murmurs calmly. It was it? It was. It was a solution, or a pardon, or possibly just a form of compassion that was flittingly within his grasp, but which no word, no affirmation of his could magnify into what is known simply as wisdom. At which point, although not knowing why so insignificant a fact is having such an impact on him, it abruptly occurs to him that Jonah, his carp, hasn't had its food. A trivial omission on his part, but also so haunting that, without waiting an instant, Augustus puts his clothing on and, whilst mumbling an indistinct incantation. No body is stirring abroad. Augustus walks to a pantry cupboard, picks up a handful of grain of a kind that Jonah is particularly partial to, and abruptly stops, having, in an unlit nook of his drawing-room, on top of an upright piano, caught sight of that curious black clay box, black from a light coating of Indian ink, on which, according to Savorgnan, thou had paid a first-class artisan from Japan to paint a tanka. Drawn to it by an almost morbid fascination, Augustus picks it up and holds it flat in his hand, staring at Val's tanka, a pictographic symbol of an incomparably finicky calligraphy, and tracing out with a long almondy thumbnail its insinuatingly squiggly contours. At which, and totally without warning, a horrifying, inhuman cry is thrust out of him. A Zahir! Look, look, a Zahir! With his flailing hand caught in mid-air, Augustus falls down in a fatal swoon.
My goodness, well read. Gosh, it's not an easy piece, is it? This is why I gave it to you to read.
Oh, okay, because you did read it beforehand. I was unprepared.
Yeah, yeah. It's quite a thing, isn't it? Now, in reading it, did you notice anything unusual about that piece of writing?
So I am going to cheat because I have read this through your writing course.
Ah,
But it took me a while to pick up on it when I read it. But it's missing the letter E.
yes, it is. Full marks. Ding, ding, ding. Well played. Gold star. It is missing the letter E. There's no E in any part of that extract, which is, really impressive in English. Stunning in French, which actually relies on the E even more than we rely on it in English. The piece this extract is taken from is called La Disparition, or A Void, and it's by Georges Perec.
So I did look up Georges Perec last week, and interestingly, this piece has been translated into Spanish and Russian. And in the Spanish version, they don't use the letter A, and in the Russian version, they don't use the letter O. And it's just crazy to me that you have this piece that is missing the letter E in French, and then you have translators who are then having to reproduce the work in a similar fashion to what it's trying to its original form in a completely different language, also constraining themselves to removing a letter.
The whole thing's really stunning, isn't it? And again, I assume those different vowels are because they're more prevalent in the respective
Yes.
languages. Now, this is a 300-page book. It's a mystery novel. And the technique of leaving out a letter or a series of letters is called a lipogram. So it's a lipogram, which actually, now that I say it aloud, doesn't it sound like something you'd send someone on their birthday to like be like a really fat person dancing, singing happy birthday? You get a lipogram.
Yeah, well, liposuction, and then lipo is the word for fat.
Yeah, you could have a lot of fun like setting up a business of lipograms, but actually what people get is just like a little bit of a Georges Perec story. It'd be so disappointing for them, I suppose. But yeah, so Perec he's a fascinating character, and he was part of a group called the Oulipo group. Now I'm going to just if you're podcasting this or if you're listening to this, you won't be able to see what I'm holding up, but it's the Oulipo Compendium for those who are doing the video version. Hello. It's a wonderful book. I heartily recommend it. It'll be in the show notes, the link to it. The Oulipo group were a group of writers who basically worked with experimental forms. And a writer that we'll probably talk about down the track would be Italo Calvino. He was a member of the Oulipo group, but Perec's a really interesting guy, and he also wrote a short story that used E as its only vowel, which was in English was called the Exeter Texts. But the thing that's fascinating about Perec, and the thing that I got into when I found out about him, was he said that using constraints freed him up, and it inspired him to the extent that many of his texts virtually wrote themselves. Can you imagine that?
No.
Right? Yeah, you can't, can you? But I always thought, well, that just sounds like a big load of nonsense. But I tried it myself. When I was doing my thesis, I had a very specific constraint on what I was doing in my writing. And once I applied the constraint, I was churning out text at an unimaginable rate, particularly for me. I was writing a chapter a day. And it was just flowing out, and everything seemed obvious because the constraint made it so. So I find constraints really helpful. Do you ever use constraints, Shannon, in your writing just naturally?
I want to say, could I say using a particular point of view? So the second person, I do like to challenge myself in using constraints like that, or first person, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely they're constraints, particularly if you're applying them arbitrarily and there's no actual reason why you're going into second person, but you're starting with that and seeing where it takes you.
The other constraint that I just thought of when I wrote Waltzing with Fish, the constraint there was to use the prime numbers in each sentence length.
Yes,
that's that
wonderful.
Was a really fun constraint.
Oh, yeah. No, that's it in a nutshell. Wonderful. What did you find? Did that slow you down, or did you find you found ways around it?
That was one of the stories that I wrote in 1 to 2 days. So I think it must have sped the process up. I mean, it was a shorter piece, 1,600 words, but it was fun to, I suppose I would agree with the statement that it wrote itself. It was fun to kind of constrain yourself to that point. Yeah, it was a great exercise in creativity.
Yeah. And so, I mean, you wouldn't think that putting constraints on yourself would free you up, but it can do. Depends on the kind of writer you are. I am very much that kind of writer. The more freedom I have, the more chained up I feel. And, because, it's possibility, isn't it? Like when you have a million different possibilities, which do you pick?
Yeah, the paradox of choice, isn't it?
Paradox of choice. Yeah. So for me, when I'm trying to get into my writing, I will often, almost every writing session, actually, I begin by placing a constraint of some description. It could be something like the process I'm going to be worried about right now is the process of a character getting through a door. And so whether or not that's actually interesting to the reader is irrelevant. It's the process for me is describing it in a great deal of detail and looking at it from different angles and trying to defamiliarize it, which is something else we'll talk about in another podcast. And then once I'm moving in the writing, I may take a lot of that stuff out. But I find that constraint gives me a singular path that I have to navigate. And I find that's how I can do my writing. So that's what I do.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll pop on to our second exercise. We also have a little bit of a soundtrack for this, and it's a dripping tap. Now, that is there again to provide an auditory constraint. It's like the decibel thing. You have to try and think past it. If you don't want to do that, then that's also fine. Skip 5 minutes ahead in the podcast, and that'll be fine. So the exercise itself, however, is we're going to write about a memory we have of a person or a place. That's pretty broad. Memory of a person or a place. And there'll be two constraints that are at play. You have to write in short, fragmented sentences of no more than 6 to 8 words.
Mm.
And each sentence has to be written backwards from right to left. So what I mean by that is you can write the word in the normal way from left to right, but you have to start on the right side of the page and work your way across to the left. And that
So
will
the
slow
word
you
order
down.
is the same.
Yeah.
Okay, but we're writing Asian style.
I suppose so, in a way.
Okay.
Although I think the individual symbols are also working right to left. So we're not doing that. So if you write the word have, it's still HAVE, but you write it. So you have to allow the space for it as you work your way across the page. It basically continually keeps you out of the flow of your writing. It keeps you thinking about it as writing as you're doing it. So 6 to 8 words, that's the maximum length of sentences. No cheating. And it's just a memory about a person or a place.
Okay.
And either listen to the dripping tap or don't, see how you feel. And
You
we'll
can
get
always
cracking.
pause to go to the toilet if that.
Well, yeah, if it does, in fact, you might want to do that before you start the exercise in case it's too suggestive. But,
Yeah.
shall we?
Yep.
5
Okay.
minutes.
I'm starting the timer right now.
And we're done. Okay.
Oh, okay.
How was that? Did you enjoy that process?
Yes, I did. This time I had to write it with pen and paper because I don't know how to do from right to left on a computer.
Oh,
So
that's a
that
good
was fun.
point. I hadn't
Yeah.
thought of that. Great. All right. Well, do you want to read yours first?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I remember the mornings the most. My nana used to walk in the morning. I always wanted to join, but it was early. Maybe 5 or 6 in the summer, but it's irrelevant. Early is early. She would knock on my door quietly, walk in. Shannon, we are going walking. Do you want to come? I would nod, be there in a minute. Then sleep would drag me back, its embrace strong against the brisk morning. I would be awoken a second time, much later. Breakfast, she would say, always with a smile. I would give anything now. That's where my sentence ended.
Oh, that's lovely. That's really
Yeah.
great. So, what did you find? What was different about that process, writing it back to front and in sentences of no more than 6 to 8 words?
First, it was very hard for full stop placement because I would automatically put it in front of the word, but I needed to put it after. It did slow me down a lot. And there was a stage, probably one sentence, when I had to kind of scrub out a few words that it was a bit long, the sentence. Definitely slowing down. I had to think a lot more. So I don't know if I would produce more doing this once they got into the flow or not.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. You might start off with an exercise like this, and then you might go, "Oh, this is going somewhere," and then you might revert back to the way you normally write. One of the things it does by being such short sentences is it, to a large extent, requires you to keep looking at the thing from a different angle. You can you can pile up observations, little sentence by little sentence, but I noticed in your piece that you were kind of having to shift your focus ever so slightly, particularly at the beginning, to accommodate the sentence length. And so you were getting more ideas in a shorter space. And that can be an interesting process. So
Yeah.
in a sense, you weren't going on a singular path there. You were multiplying the number of paths in the writing. So how's that for an interesting paradox?
Yeah.
It's also a very touching piece. It'd be something I'd be quite interested to hear more of, if you decided to work
I
on
only
that.
needed one more sentence to finish. It was
And
just,
you were stymied by the timer, the flush
yeah, I
of
was.
doom. Oh
Hmm.
dear. Okay. Well, I'll read you mine.
Yes, please.
This is about a place, but it's not. It's kind of hard to explain. It's a place and a time, I suppose. Time being a place at times. Okay. It was a sinking, an odd sense of buoyancy about the shoulders. Green water salty. I don't recall how tall I was then. The lake was twice as deep, the hole on the bottom twice my size. 2 child lengths to oblivion. I waved my arms for help. I waved my arms goodbye. It was the first time my life flashed. So little of it back then. So little I was. Half the length of oblivion, swirling, welcoming, and entirely new. So
Wow.
that was my piece, written backwards, and that
That was
was.
great.
Well, thank you. That was a memory of my first time drowning. We always remember our first time.
Well, yeah, I loved
Yeah.
the piece when you said you waved for help, you waved for goodbye. That was so punchy.
Yeah, I do recall that that was my memory of it. I was waving for help, and when no one was looking, I kind of in that moment thought, "Well, I'm done for," and that's what it is. And I felt quite at peace with it. It's quite a strange, and not something I've thought about in probably decades, actually.
How old were you?
I'm not 100% sure. I was small. I was definitely small. And there was a great big hole at the bottom of this lake we were swimming in. And it had a suction to it. And I swam over the top of it and it started pulling me down. And I suppose I would have been like maybe eight or nine, something like that.
Yeah.
And I was an all right swimmer, but this thing was, like an aunt that you never really wanted, that sort of just hugging you way too tight. It was like that. It felt friendly in a weird kind of way. I don't know how to explain that exactly. But yeah, for me, that's a more useful approach for the kind of writer that I am. I'm not quite sure if I think I'm often, what I need is to be able to see the writing more closely. I think when you need to free write, it's because in a sense you're too close to your writing, you're too close to your ideas, and so you need some space from them. And that's what free writing can give you. But for my version of writer's block, if such a thing exists, I need to be drawn in more, and I find constraints do that. If you do go out and get yourself a copy of the Oulipo Compendium, you will find lots of different examples of writing constraints that people have tried using, famous writers, and obviously the outcome of those writing sessions. It's really interesting stuff. And I think if you use one of those two techniques, you'll probably write your way out of writer's block, if it exists, and towards inspiration.
Yeah. And I'm really interested to hear or read other people's works they've produced in that 5-minute segment. So if you would like us to read it out on our next podcast, please email it to admin@thepleasureofthetext.com. And yeah, I'm happy to read anything out. I'm very excited to see what other people have produced in that time period.
Yes, please make it a really hairy thing so that Shannon has to cope with like lots and lots of polysyllabic words and awkward rhymes. Get it in there and let's see if she can read it. I think that would be great fun.
Yeah, if you want to torture your host, definitely do that.
Yeah, and if you'd rather torture me, I'll read them out too. You can nominate your host to torture.
Oh, that's a fun idea.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So we're concluding that, well, firstly, you don't believe that writer's block is a thing.
No.
And it's just whether you're too close to your work or too far away from your work.
That's it. Get yourself some glasses.
Yes, go get your eyes checked.
Yeah.
If anyone owns an optometrist, if you want to be sponsored, just let us know, and we'll
like and
go
subscribe.
Get some glasses.
Yeah, great.
I think Jay was really fun.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, next time, our next session next week, go get yourself a copy of Secret Rendezvous by Kobo Abe. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, and I'm really excited. I'm halfway through and I can't wait to talk about the horse, the giant horse in the room. You'll get the reference if you read the book.
It does sound like fun. It really does.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for joining us, and until next time, everyone. See you later.
See you later.